we were to take people off their regular jobs and say, get on this issue, even if we could put other measures in place, we still would not be able to come up. It's hard to explain how difficult this is or why this is the case, but that is what is going to be discussed in the closed session, because all of this is classified information this afternoon. I assume the staff of members, all the members here will be there. But my pledge was to do the best I could to try to get to some answer. And the result was we couldn't get to an answer, number one. And number two, trying to get to an answer would totally disrupt the efforts of the agency. Now, if you might be able to make the case, let's hire 1,000 more people and get to the answer if you knew that you would get to the answer. Admiral Rogers has told me, I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, that if someone else out there knows how to get to it, he's welcome to have them come out and tell NSA how to do it. Well, but everybody says you can get to the number, it's easy. There's all kinds of agencies out there that can do it. I think you might welcome the advice if they wanted to do that. So it really raises the question of why there has to be an exact number.
Well, if we're going to hire 1,000 new people, I'd sooner them focus on terrorists and foreign intelligence services than violating the privacy rights of American citizens. My time has expired.
Senator Harris.
Thank you. Admiral Rogers, in response to the question from Senator Manchin, you, it appears, felt free to discuss the conversations you've had with the President in January about Russian active measures. Can you share with this committee how you're determining which conversations you can share and which you don't feel free to share?
Ma'am, the fact that we briefed the President previously, both went up to New York, and previously is a matter of public record.
So if it's a matter of public record, then you feel free to discuss those conversations?
If it's not classified. You can keep trying to trip me up. Senator, if you could I get to respond, please, ma'am?
No, sir. No.
Okay.
Are you saying that if it is classified, you will not discuss it? And then my follow-up question obviously would be, do you believe that discussion of Russian active measures is not the subject of classified information?
I stand by my previous comments.
Thank you. Mr. Rosenstein, when you appointed a special counsel on May 17th, you stated, quote, based upon the unique circumstances, the public interest requires me to place this investigation under the authority of a person who exercises a degree of independence from the normal chain of command. The order you issued along with that statement provides that 28 CFR 600.4 through 10 were applicable. Those are otherwise known as the Special Counsel regulations. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator.
And it states that the Special Counsel, quote, shall not be subject to the day-to-day supervision of any official of the department. However, the regulations permit you, as acting Attorney General for this matter, to override Director Mueller's investigative and prosecutorial decisions under specified circumstances. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator.
And it also provides that you may fire or remove Director Mueller under specified circumstances. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you indicated in your statement that you chose a person who exercises a degree of independence, not full independence from the normal chain of command. So my question is this. In December of 2003, then Attorney General John Ashcroft recused himself from the investigation into the leak that led to the disclosure of Valerie Plame's identity as a CIA officer. The acting Attorney General at the time was Jim Comey. He appointed a special counsel, Patrick Fitzgerald, to take over the matter. In a letter dated December 30th of 2003, Mr. Comey wrote the following to Mr. Fitzgerald, quote, I direct you to exercise the authority as special counsel independent of the supervision or control of any officer of the department. In a subsequent letter, dated February 6, 2004, Mr. Comey wrote to clarify the earlier letter, stating that his delegation of authority to Mr. Fitzgerald was, quote, plenary. Moreover, it said that my, quote, conferral on you of the title of special counsel in this matter should not be misunderstood to suggest that your position and authorities are defined or limited by 28 CFR Part 600. Those are the special counsel regulations we discussed. So, would you agree, Mr. Rosenstein, to provide a letter to Director Mueller, similarly, providing that Director Mueller has the authority as special counsel, quote, independent of the supervision or control of any officer of the department and ensure that Director Mueller has the authority that is plenary and not, quote, defined or limited by the Special Counsel regulations?
Well, Senator, I'm very sensitive about time, and I'd like to have a very lengthy conversation and explain that all to you. I tried to do that.
Can you give me a yes or no answer,
in the
please?
closed briefing. Well, it's not a short answer, Senator. The answer
It is either you are willing to do that or not, as we have precedent in that regard.
But
Mr. Chairman, they should be allowed to answer the question.
It's a long question you pose, Senator, and I fully appreciate the import of your question, and I'll get to the answer. My quibble with you is Pat Fitzgerald is a very principled, very independent person. I have a lot of respect for him. Pat Fitzgerald could have been fired by the President because he was a United States attorney. Robert Mueller cannot, because he's protected by those special counsel regulations. So although it's theoretically true that there are circumstances where he could be removed by the acting attorney general, which for this case at this time is me, your assurance of his independence is Robert Mueller's integrity and Andy McCabe's integrity and my integrity and those regulations.
Sir, if I may, the greater assurance is not that you and I believe in Director Mueller's integrity, which I have no question about Mr. Mueller's integrity. It is that you would put in writing an indication based on your authority as the acting attorney general that he has full independence in regards to the investigations that are before him. Are you willing or are you not willing to give him the authority to be fully independent of your ability statutorily and legally to fire him?
He has the
yes or no, sir?
He has the full independence that is authorized by those regulations. And
are
Senator,
you willing to do as has been done before?
Would the senator suspend? The chair is going to exercise its right to allow the witnesses to answer the question, and the committee is on notice to provide the witnesses the courtesy, which has not been extended all the way across, extend the courtesy for questions to get answered.
Mr. Chairman, respespectly,
Mr. Rosenstein,
I would point out that this witness has joked with as we all have,
the senator
ability
will suspend.
to filibuster.
Mr. Rosenstein, would you like to thoroughly answer
Thank
the
you,
question?
Mr. Chairman. Senator, I'm not joking. The truth is, I have a lot of experience with these issues, and I could speak to you for a very long time about it. And I'm sympathetic. I appreciate the 5-minute limit. That's not my limit. But the answer is, this originated, as you may know, with the independent counsel statute. And I worked for an independent counsel, and I worked in the department during the independent counsel era, when independent counsels were appointed by authorization of the Senate. They were appointed by federal judges, and they had essentially the authority equivalent to the Attorney General. That statute sunsetted, and the majority of members of this body concluded that that was appropriate because they did not want independent counsels who were 100% independent of the Department of Justice. That was a determination made by the legislature. Now, I know the folks at the department who drafted this regulation under Janet Reno, and they drafted it to deal with this type of circumstance. And the idea was that there would be some circumstances where, because of unusual events, it was appropriate to appoint somebody from outside the department, not somebody like Pat Fitzgerald, who was a U.S. attorney who could be fired, but somebody from outside the department who could be trusted to conduct this investigation independently and could be given an appropriate degree of independence. Under the regulation, he has, I believe, adequate authority to conduct this investigation. And your ultimate check, Senator, is, number one, the integrity of the people involved in the investigation. But number two, the fact that if he were overruled or if he were fired, we would be required under the regulation to report to the Congress. And so I believe that's an appropriate check. And so while I realize that theoretically anybody could be fired, and so there's a potential for undermining an investigation, I am confident, Senator, that Director Mueller, Mr. McCabe, and I and anybody else who may fill those positions in the future will protect the integrity of that investigation. That's my commitment to you, and that's the guarantee that you and the American people have.
Senator
So
Cornyn.
is that a no?
Senator Cornyn.
Well, seems to be one thing we all agree on, at least so far based on the questions and the comments, and that is the 702 is an important tool for the intelligence community and one that needs to be preserved. And I agree with Senator Cotton that it should be extended without a sunset provision as currently written. So it's good to have one thing we agree on. But I want to ask Director Coates and perhaps Admiral Rogers if you want to comment on this as well. As I understand the framework of 702, it is to intentionally not target American citizens. It is to intentionally target foreign persons and to not collect information from American citizens except by way of incidental collection. And I think you've described, Admiral Rogers, the extensive procedures that the law requires and that NSA practices have in place to minimize the access of anybody in the intelligence community to that U.S. person. And indeed, you've talked about purging incidental collection that was made in the course of a 702 investigation. So it strikes me, Director Coates, the question that Senator Wyden has asked you and that's come up several times, to intentionally target American citizens in order to generate a number is just the opposite of what the structure of 702 provides, because the whole idea is to not collect, not to be able to gather information about American citizens except in the incidental course of collecting information against a foreign intelligence target. Is that a fair statement?
That's fair in my mind, and it was a central piece of the information of fact that caused me to come to the conclusion that this would do just exactly what you said. You're breaching someone's privacy to determine whether or not they are an American person.
To generate a list for Congress.
It potentially could, yes, to generate a list for Congress. That wasn't the only basis on which we made the decision, but that was an essential basis. Thank you.
I want to ask a little bit more about the minimization procedures and the importance of those, and a little bit about unmasking of U.S. persons' names that Admiral Rogers and others have, Director Coates, you've talked about. You've explained the process and the elaborate procedures that are in place to make sure that this is not done accidentally or casually. And I think that's very important to reassuring the American people that in the collection of foreign intelligence, we are extraordinarily protective of the privacy of U.S. citizens who might be incidentally collected against. And so, to me, the minimization procedures are very important. The internal policies of the NSA when it comes to collecting foreign intelligence that happens to incidentally impact American citizens is absolutely critical to this balance between security and individual privacy. Perhaps this is a question for Mr. Rosenstein, though, and maybe Director McCabe. If someone is to use the unmasking process for a political purpose, is that potentially a crime?
Yes, Senator.
And Director McCabe, perhaps, or Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein, for somebody to leak the name of an American citizen that is unmasked in the course of incidental collection, to leak that classified information, is that also potentially a crime?
Yes, I think that's the most significant point, Senator. I think it's important for people to understand unmasking is done in the course of ordinary legitimate intelligence gathering, when the identity of the person on the other end of the phone, the other end of the message, may be relevant to understand the intelligence significance of the communication. Leaking is a completely different matter. Leaking is a crime. Disclosing information to somebody without a legitimate purpose, need to know that information, that will be prosecuted in appropriate circumstances. And there have been cases where we've been able to determine there's a willful violation of federal law, a disclosure that was not authorized, and prosecutions have been brought and will be brought.
And Mr. Rosenstein, not to pick on you or Director McCabe, but I think there's some confusion when we talk about generically about Russian investigations. We've described the role of the Special Counsel, which I think you've discussed in great detail, but that's primarily to investigate potential criminal acts and counterintelligence activities. Is it not?
The answer to that is yes. It is the idea of the Russian investigation that has much broader significance, I know, to many of you than the piece that Director McCabe and I are referring to, and the piece that Director Mueller is investigating.
Right. Well, that's enormously helpful, at least to me, because when people speak generically of the Russian investigation, I think they're also including things like our responsibilities, the Intelligence Committee, to do oversight of the intelligence and of the potential countermeasures we might undertake to deal with the active measures campaign of the Russian government, which were clearly documented in the intelligence community assessment. But by my count, there are multiple committees of the United States Senate, including the Judiciary Committee on which I serve, which has different jurisdiction and oversight responsibilities. It's our job to do the investigation and write legislation. We're not the FBI. We're not the Special Counsel. We're not the Department of Justice. And I'm afraid in the conversation that we've been having here, people have been conflating all of those, and those are very distinct and importantly distinct functions. Thank you.
Senator Reid.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Director McCabe, on May 11th, you testified, quote, Director Comey enjoyed broad support when the FBI and still does to this day, and then you added that you hold him in the absolute highest regard. Is still that the case?
It is, sir.
Thank you. Director McCabe, I'm trying to understand the rationale for your unwillingness to comment upon your conversations with Director Comey. First, you have had, I would presume, and correct me if I'm wrong, conversations with Mr. Mueller. You've had those conversations?
Yes, sir.
You're fully familiar with the scope of the investigation, since you've dealt with not only Mr. Mueller, but also with...
I am, sir, but I think it's important to note that Mr. Mueller and his team are currently in the process of determining what that scope is. And much in the way that Senator Cornyn just referred to, the FBI maintains a much broader responsibility to continue investigating issues relative to potential Russian counterintelligence activity and threats posed to us from our Russian adversaries. So determining exactly where those lanes in the road are, where does Director Mueller's scope overlap into our pre-existing and long-running Russian responsibilities is somewhat of a challenge at the moment, and that is why I'm trying to be particularly respectful of his efforts and not to take any steps that might compromise his investigation.
But getting back to your rationale for not commenting on the conversation between you and Mr. Comey, it seems to me that what you've said is that either that is part of a criminal investigation or likely to become part of a criminal investigation, the conversation between the President of the United States and Mr. Comey, and therefore you cannot properly comment on that. Is that accurate?
That's accurate, sir.
What about the conversations between Director Coates and Admiral Rogers with the President of the United States? Is that likely to become or is part of a ongoing criminal investigation?
I couldn't comment on that, sir. I'm not familiar with that, and it wouldn't be, for the same reasons it's not appropriate for me to comment on Director Comey's conversations, I certainly wouldn't comment on those that I'm further away from.
Mr. Rosenstein, are you aware of the possibility of an investigation, the conversations that Director Coates and Admiral Rogers have had with the President?
My familiarity with that, Senator, is limited to what I read in the newspaper this morning and what we heard here today.
Okay. Director Coates, have you had any contact with the Special Prosecutor or any...
I have not.
Have you been advised by any of your counsels, or private or public, that this conversation that you have with the President could be subject to a criminal investigation?
I have not.
Admiral Rogers, the same question.
To the last question, no, I have not.
Okay. Let me just return again to the points that I think Senator King made very well, which is this unwillingness to comment on the conversation with the President, but to characterize it in a way that you didn't feel pressured, yet refusing to answer a very specific and non-intelligence related issue. I don't see how it would impact on the classification and our status, whether or not you were specifically asked by the President to do anything. Do you still maintain that you can't comment on whether you're asked or not?
Nothing has changed since my initial response.
I stand by my previous answer.
I just must say that the impression I have is that if you could say that, you would say that. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Senator McCain.
Well, gentlemen, you're here at an interesting time. It's funny how sometimes events run together. This morning's Washington Post, top intelligence official told associates Trump asked him if he could intervene with Comey on FBI Russia probe. It goes into some detail. I'm sure you've read the article, and it's more than disturbing, obviously, if it's true that the President of the United States was trying to get the Director of National Intelligence and others to abandon an investigation into Russian involvement. It's pretty serious. I also understand the position that you're in, because it is classified information, and yet here it is on this morning's Washington Post in some detail. I'm sure you've read it. So I guess if I understand you right, Director Coates, is that in a closed session you are more than ready to discuss this situation. Is that correct?
I would hope we'd have the opportunity to do that.
Well, I hope we can provide you with that opportunity. You know, it's just shows what kind of an Orwellian existence that we live in. I mean, it's detailed, as you know from reading the story, as to when you met, what you discussed, et cetera, and yet here in a public hearing before the American people, we can't talk about what was described in detail in this morning's Washington Post. Do you want to comment on that, Dan?
Are you asking me? Comment on the integrity of the Washington Post reporting? I guess I've been around town long.
It's pretty detailed.
I guess I've been around town long enough to say, not take everything at face value that's printed in the Post. I served on the committee here and often saw that the information that we had been discussed had been reported, but that wasn't always accurate. But I think this is the response that I gave to the Post was that I did not want to publicly share what I thought were private conversations with the President of the United States. Most of them, almost all of them, intelligence related and classified. And I didn't think it was appropriate to do so in an open for the Post to report what it reported or do that in an open session.
Well, it's an unfortunate situation that you're sitting there because it's classified information, and this morning's Washington Post describes in some detail, not just outlined, but times and dates and subjects that are being discussed. And I'm certainly not blaming you, but it certainly is an interesting town in which we exist.
Just because it's published in the Washington Post doesn't mean it's now unclassified.
But unfortunately, whether it's classified or not, it's now out to the world, which is obviously not your fault, but describes dates and times and who met with who. And so, well, do you want to tell us any more about the Russian involvement in our election that we don't already know from reading the Washington Post?
I don't think that's a position that I'm in. I do know that there are ongoing investigations. I do know that we continue to provide all the relevant intelligence we have to enable those investigations to be carried out with integrity and with knowledge.
Well, it must be a bit frustrating to you in protecting what is clearly sensitive information and then to read all about it in the Washington Post. You have my sympathy, and I expressed that at your confirmation hearing, doubting your sanity. So Admiral, you got anything to say about it?
No, sir, other than, boy, some days I sure wish I was an ensign on the bridge of that destroyer again.
I can understand that. I feel the same way. Mr. Rosenstein.
Senator, I can't speak for anybody else, but I am proud to be here. I'm proud to be here with Director McCabe, and I'm sure he feels the same way.
I do.
Whatever that might mean. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator McCain. The chair is going to recognize Senator Wyden for one question on 702.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the courtesy. This one, Director Coates, I'd like a yes or no answer on. Can the government use FISA Act Section 702 to collect communications it knows are entirely domestic?
Not to my knowledge. It would be against the law.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Warner.
Again, I want to thank all the witnesses, but I come out of this hearing with more questions than when I went in. Gentlemen, you were both willing to somehow characterize your conversations with the president, that you didn't feel pressure, but you wouldn't share the content. In the case of Admiral Rogers, we will have an independent third party that will at least provide some level of contemporaneous description of that conversation, and obviously why there was concerns enough to commit that to writing. I'm pretty frustrated that there is this deference to the special prosecutor, even though the special prosecutor has not talked to you. I'm concerned with the Deputy Attorney General, also deference to the special prosecutor, but there doesn't seem to be, and this committee and the chairman and I are committed to making sure that we appropriately deconflict. What we don't seem to have is the same commitment to find out whether the President of the United States tried to intervene directly with leaders of our intelligence community and ask them to back off or downplay. You've testified to your feelings response. Candidly, your feelings response is important, but the content of his communication with you is absolutely critical. And I guess I would just say the president's not above the law. If the president intervenes in a conversation and intervenes in an investigation like that, would that not be subject of some concern? Mr. Rosenstein?
Senator, if anybody obstructs a federal investigation, it would be a subject of concern. I don't care who they are. And I can commit to you, if you're looking for commitment from Mr. McCabe and from me, that if there is any credible allegation that anybody seeks to obstruct a federal investigation, it will be investigated appropriately, whether it's by Mr. McCabe, by me, by the special counsel. That's our responsibility, and we'll see to it.
Well, I thank the chairman for the fact that we've been working on this in a bipartisan way, and we will ultimately have to get to the content of those conversations. Thank you.
Director Coates, I know you've got to go. Give me 90 more seconds, if I could. And this question probably to you, Admiral Rogers. Have our partners globally used 702 intelligence to stop a terrorist attack?
Yes, sir. And if we were to lose a 702 authority, I would fully expect leaders from some of our closest allies to put out one loud scream.
And in most cases, didn't they take credit for our intelligence?
They don't publicly talk about where it comes from, but we acknowledge NSA is a primary provider of insights.
I just wanted to get on the record.
Yes, sir. A host of nations.
This is a global asset.
Yes.
That the war on terror has is 702.
Sir.
Now, Mr. Chairman, if I could just take the time you were trying to protect for me for my next appointment, to just say following, and I just want to repeat, following my interaction with my contemporaries in a number of European countries, they are deeply, deeply grateful to us for the information derived from 702 has saved what they said literally hundreds of lives.
Well, certainly the committee is privy to those instances in a lot of cases, and we're grateful for that. And gentlemen, I want to thank you for your testimony. But before we adjourn, I would ask each of you to take a message back to the administration. You're in positions whereby you're required to keep this committee fully and currently informed of intelligence activities. In cases where the sensitivity of those activities would not be appropriate for the full committee or open session, there's a mechanism that you may use to brief the appropriate parties. It's sometimes often referred to as the Gang of Eight notification briefing, and I think without exception everybody at the table has utilized that tool before. Congressional oversight of the intelligence activities of our government is necessary and it must be robust. Thus, the provisions of this unique briefing mechanism, given the availability of that sensitive briefing avenue, at no time should you be in a position where you come to Congress without an answer. It may be in a different format, but the requirements of our oversight duties and your agencies demand it. With that, again, I thank you for being here. This hearing's adjourned.
They were